Well, welcome along. Hello, gentlemen. How are we?
All back together.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, it's cold in here as well, isn't it? That's why I've got a cardigan.
First moan of the day in the first 5 seconds.
Who had 5 seconds in the sweep?
Well, I think we all assumed in the summer that if City weren't going to win the Premier League title, it was probably going to be Arsenal who were front and centre to lift the trophy. Obviously, it's not happened. They've fallen short. Again, James, you're the one that watches them more than anyone. Where's it gone wrong, do you think, and what do they need to do to fix it?
Easy one to start. They started short. They didn't have enough last summer. And I think they relied on player availability being as optimum as it was the year before, when they could pick pretty much the vast majority of the same team every week. And they relied on getting the absolute maximum out of their two key players, Martin Odegaard and Bukayo Saka. And so when they went into this season and they didn't strengthen, and I know we're going to talk about signing a striker and strengthening that forward line, but when they opted not to do that, and they looked at Benjamin Sesko, they did the work on him, he was the one that they wanted to go and sign, he then signed a new contract at Red Bull Leipzig, and they thought, okay, if the guy we want is not necessarily available, then we wait. And actually we scored 91 goals in the league. You know, it was a club record for them in the Premier League. We're confident we've got enough goals in the team and we can hit those levels with then the players that we have signed to make us kick on in other areas, then maybe we've got enough. And that was the mistake. The mistake they made was ultimately before a ball was kicked. And, you know, I've heard Arteta recently talk about how they were the best team in the Champions League despite getting knocked out, how all the stats say we should have won those two games against PSG, how, you know, nobody could have gone through what we've gone through and still be in second place. I just don't buy that. You know, they need more than they have. And this is a huge summer for them, particularly when you consider they have a new sporting director, you know, who's going to come in and is going to want to stamp his authority on it as well. And clearly, there's a lot of work to do, more than I think Mikel Arteta would let on.
Do a lot of his claims and justifications kind of ring a bit hollow when you compare him to Arne Slot, who's coming at Liverpool, hasn't added to his squad, basically worked with the squad that he had that was left to him by Jurgen Klopp, which didn't finish above Arsenal last season. And they've gone on to win the Premier League by a million miles, really, haven't they? They've won it by some distance. And Arsenal had a squad that was better than Liverpool's last year and they haven't kicked on. So to me, it seems that at times Arteta and Arsenal are almost like trying to get perfection. They're trying to fine-tune it so much that they're missing the bigger picture, that you just need, like you say, certain players in certain areas. Maybe be a bit less like the overbearing parent that he is and just give the team a bit more freedom, a bit more, just the ability to do things off the cuff. I just see something in Arsenal that doesn't strike me as a team or a setup that's built for winning.
Well, if you take the first 25, 30 minutes of that second leg against Paris Saint-Germain, they were really good. They were really good. And that is Arteta's sort of ultimate template, really, is to control the game, have the team penned in, the opposition penned in their own box, ideally, but certainly in their own half. And, you know, pass, left to right, and then, you know, somebody makes the difference in the final third. The problem is they don't have enough difference makers in the final third, and they don't have a clinical goal scorer. I mean, I don't think it's as simple as saying sign a striker and then win the league, but they get a lot closer. I mean, Absolutely. Everybody can see it, you know. And the fact is, when we all know this when we write these kind of pieces, you know, we talk about injury crisis and Arsenal might have to put a midfielder up front, or Arteta's going to have to get creative this weekend. And then in the second part of your story, when you list the players who are injured, you go Gabriel Jesus, Kai Havertz.
Yeah.
That's it. There isn't anyone else.
And Gabriel Jesus doesn't do anything anyway.
Then you're into, Trossard can play in there, Martinelli can play in there. Obviously, Mourinho ended up playing in there for a while. But they're so obviously one short, and it is only one, but they need an elite one at the top of that list.
Do you not feel a bit of sympathy, though, for Arteta? Because you mentioned there the first, 20 minutes against PSG. Donnarumma's made 2 unbelievable saves in the first 20 minutes. Say Arsenal are 3-0 up in the second leg. They go through. We're sat here talking about potentially Arsenal winning the Champions League. Arteta's a fantastic coach, and look how far he's brought Arsenal from not even qualifying to actually winning it. And instead, Donnarumma plays out of his skin, and we started, potentially talking about Arsenal failing again. Is Arteta's job on the line? How close are they actually to winning anything? You're talking about really, really fine margins, not necessarily in the Premier League, because I think that gap's massive, but in terms of being successful and winning something significant.
They very rarely get outplayed, Arsenal. I'm at 90% of their games, and they do not. I can't think of many occasions where they've come out well beaten and you've just thought, okay, they were just second best today, and Arteta's had to sort of admit that. I think they've drawn, is it 13 Premier League games this season? The differences are small, but they are consistently there, and they are consistently on the wrong side of them. And look, we're talking about the last step, the hardest step, going from consistent challenges to winning, and he has done a very good job. I don't think we can deny that. I don't think we should be quick to dismiss that, actually, from a cultural point of view, just how sort of toxic it was really when he took over, and he's turned them into a team that is absolutely determined to win, but he's just a bit short. It's not a rebuild. We're not talking about. I don't think Arteta needs to reinvent the wheel here. I just think they need a little bit more of what they're already doing.
The problem is, though, but we sat here on this podcast talking about if City were going to miss out, then it had to be Arsenal. It had to be Arsenal to take advantage. And now we're talking about Arsenal waiting for another season, and Liverpool are going to strengthen, City are going to be back, Chelsea are going to spend money, Newcastle are going to presumably have Champions League revenue to spend. You're talking about the gap potentially getting even bigger.
Well, and this is why January was so important, because they had an opportunity there. And I'm not saying Ollie Watkins wins you the league or the Champions League, but he gets you closer. Yeah. And that was a situation that was presented to them. Villa came and said, we want 60 million for Ollie Watkins. Now, I'm not saying he's necessarily worth that, but they thought he was worth 40 because they bid 40. So it then becomes a 20 million pound decision, maybe a 15 million pound decision if you can negotiate a little bit. Now, for 15 million quid, do we want to go for it and seize that opportunity that you're talking about? City have fallen away, the other teams are scrambling. We're right there with Liverpool, who we don't know at that point whether they can last the distance. We don't know whether Arne Slot can see it out. They've still got 5-6 months to go. Do we go for it? They decided not to, and they are very proud of how strategic they are in the market. They like the fact that they plan their windows 2-3 windows out, but ultimately they didn't gamble enough, and that has cost them. And only time will tell how much that has cost them, because there have been teams in the past. You think of Pochettino Spurs, or Harry Redknapp Spurs, for example, going back 10-12 years when they were top of the league in January, and he wanted. I always remember this, when he wanted Carlos Tevez and Gary Cahill, and he got Ryan Nelson and Louis Saha, and that was the compromise that Spurs made, and they didn't win. They didn't kick on, and they didn't win the league. And this is a bit similar to that, is that they had the opportunity there to go and sign 29-year-old proven Premier League goal scorer, who, by the way, is a boyhood Arsenal fan. Fit, could have come straight in and done a job. Has played in the Champions League. Is proven at the highest level. Played for England. Scored in a European Championship semi-final. And they didn't do it.
But the counter to all that is, and we have to say that Arsenal beat Real Madrid over two legs in both games. They beat the European champions. Everyone was saying before the game, me, you, everybody, it's Real Madrid, it's the Bernabeu, they're not going to do it, they haven't got the experience, and they did it. So, was it 5-1 on aggregate?
Yeah.
So basically, they've beaten Real Madrid. Did Arsenal and their fans maybe get a little bit giddy with that, thinking that they've arrived now, they've beaten Real Madrid? Because I must admit, going to the PSG game, it did feel like it was PSG, we'll get to the final, we're going to win the Champions League for the first time. Beating Real Madrid has maybe given them a false sense of growth, a false sense of where they are.
I think Real Madrid's history in the competition, they're just the team sheet alone kind of makes it feel as though any opposition you play beyond that feels like a bit of a step down. So therefore, it should be easier in theory. So maybe there was a bit of that, but I do think people are judging Arsenal against their own history, and obviously City and Liverpool who are winning things. I think if you talk to Arteta about it, he would sort of say, well, actually, we're coming from a different place. We're coming from a low base, and actually going from, it's the first semi-final since 2009. It's a long time, 16 years, to get to that stage. So they, in that sense, feel that there's another step forward, that they are, I think if he continues to try and argue they're one of the best four teams in Europe, then this is where he's going to start making himself look a bit silly.
But teams have to miss out, don't they? Over history, teams have gone close and made the breakthrough. PSG got to the semi-finals last year, lost. They got to the final this time, and the Man United team under Ferguson went close and close. Even City under Pep, they went close and close before making the breakthrough. It's just that Arsenal seem to be at that point now where the breakthrough should have been 12 months ago, really.
And Yeah, I agree. And I think part of the problem is that I'm not sure Arteta is quite clear in how he wants to take that final step. I always remember in a presser about 18 months ago that he was talking about how he wanted Pep style, a kind of streamed down 19, 20-man squad to work with, sprinkling the youngsters around that. And he wanted that tight group, concentrate on keeping them fit, consistency of selection, and that's how we work. And then more recently, he's talked about, with the number of games we've got now, maybe the Premier League needs to look at expanding the 25-man squads, and we need to start thinking about 28 or maybe even 30-man squads. And I think, we forget maybe that this is his first managerial role. He's still a young manager. He's still feeling his way into it to some extent. I'm talking at the very highest level now, at winning things. He's coming up against proven winners in the Champions League and obviously in the Premier League in Pep. And I think he's just not quite sure how to take that final step. And this is why this summer is really important, because I think Andrea Berta is somebody who the club are looking at to say, you can get us there. You know what we need. So these two need to work together and be proactive in the market.
I don't think there's much from the club, is there, about Arteta's position, about whether it's in doubt or anything, but there is murmurings among some fans. I'm not suggesting that it's widespread, but there is bits from fans suggesting that Arteta's he's had enough time, he's had years to make the breakthrough when he's the guy that can't get them over the line and they need to kind of look to move him on. Do you have sympathy with those Arsenal fans? Do you think there's a valid point there, or is it just frustrated fans kind of throwing the toys out of the pram a little bit?
I don't sense that is true in the stadiums. I don't feel it at the Emirates. I certainly don't see it among the away fans. They tend to sing his name a lot still during games. I think we're talking probably about a few people on social media, and how much credence do we really give to that? However, if they don't go and do what they need to do in the summer, and they don't start particularly well next season, and let's say City are back to the sort of traditional level, or Liverpool kick on again, or they suddenly sort of find themselves at kind of 8-10 points off the pace come Christmas time, there will start to be some murmurings. I don't think Arsenal will sack him under almost any circumstance next season. I just can't, unless it's a complete capitulation. I just can't see it. If you look at the squad profile, the ages are all right in terms of looking as though they're going to improve and kick on again. If they add the 2 or 3 they need, then they should be bang there. But he will be under more pressure. But I just totally dismiss the idea that he could lose his job in the next 12 months.
But at what point does somebody at the club think, yeah, we've made progress, but Arsenal are there to win things? I mean, what is it, 4 FA Cups since the Invincibles in 2004. So that's not in keeping with Arsenal's history. I think this is the longest they've ever gone without winning the league, 21 years. And, they're a big, big club. At some point, he's going to have to win something. He's going to have to make that breakthrough. And I guess if he has a bad summer or a good summer, it makes no difference to the point that he has to win something next year. Can you see us sitting here in 12 months' time and they haven't won anything, how the pitch will look, no matter what's happened during the season? If they don't win something next year, how does he justify that? How does he kind of say, I'm still the man for the future?
Because we could be talking about a team that loses the Premier League on the final day. We could be talking about a team that gets to the Champions League final and loses. We could be talking about...
But it's losing. Do you know what I mean? It's like, you've got to win. They haven't... I can't... When was the last time they won the League Cup? That was pre-Wenger years, wasn't it? Arsenal don't win enough for the size of the club. And at some point, they have to change that. Man United have been terrible for 10, 12 years, and they've won, 4 or 5 major trophies. Liverpool had a bad period between Benitez and Klopp. And they...
Okay, but would you rather be Arsenal or Man United right now?
Yeah, but that question, though, I've heard this question asked about if Spurs win the Europa League, who's had the best season? Now, obviously, looking at the table, it's Arsenal. But in 10 years' time, when you look back, and if Spurs win the trophy, this season will be better for Tottenham than Arsenal, because who remembers when finishing second or third? It's about winning trophies. It's about winning things.
But that's the wrong context. The context is, for Tottenham, they haven't won a trophy for 17 years. Exactly. It's a totally different situation. Arsenal have been eyeing... They're not interested in it, rightly or wrongly. They wouldn't be interested in trying to win the Europa League. I mean, obviously, if they're in it, they'd have a go. But they have been trying to build a team. Arteta's always talked about this 5-phase plan, that they at the end of that is that they are winning the Premier League and they're winning the Champions League.
Had that outlook,
those are the prizes they go for.
Tottenham under Poch never looked at the FA Cup and the Carabao Cup. Didn't treat them seriously, and it was like they got a focus on the big competition, but they didn't win anything. And you look back at that team, you mentioned it before, that Tottenham team didn't quite go to where it should have done. Now, Arsenal might be in that same position because they lost the Carabao Cup semi-final to Newcastle, as you say. They lost to PSG in the semi-final of the Champions League. I just think he needs to win something to maintain that credibility that he's the guy to take them forward. Because maybe there's a coach out there that can just be the guy that takes them to the next level. Maybe he's not an elite coach to the point where he's not a Tuchel, he's not a Klopp, he's not a Guardiola. Maybe he just isn't. Maybe he's the guy that takes them from there to there, and they need somebody else to go from that next level.
The problem is, though, they've progressed beyond the FA Cup and the League Cup, haven't they? And you talk about context, that United haven't got anywhere near winning the Premier League title. Obviously, Spurs haven't. So the FA Cup and the League Cup become more important. Arsenal, have progressed beyond that. So now you're looking at 2 trophies generally that can they can justify winning,
but
which is the Premier League and the Champions League.
If you win one of those, it just stops the noise. You can't.
What happens next year if he finishes 4th and wins the League Cup? Genuinely,
I think that's a better season than this season because you qualify for the Champions League and you got a trophy.
But they wouldn't view it like that.
Yeah, but that's the problem with football these days, isn't it? It's all about balance sheets and it's not about the glory of winning something. It's just clubs that win something. The clubs are there for a reason, aren't they? They're not there to make money, they're there to win things for the fans.
But to some extent, he's a victim of his own narrative because you can't talk about an overhaul of culture. You can't spend hundreds of millions of pounds as they have. Let's not forget, this doesn't come cheap, what they're doing here. And they will spend, I don't think they're going to spend massive amounts, but they will spend probably considerably in the summer again. You can't talk about journeys and 5-phase plans and cultural changes and things and then deliver a League Cup and go, there you go.
Yeah, but it's a building block, isn't it? The culture at the minute is what.
But they're past the point of the building block. Yeah, but they're past the point of that.
They got rid of the toxic culture, but then the culture is of one of making excuses, or pretending that they're the best team of the Champions League, or pretending that Liverpool don't deserve to win the title this year because Arsenal are better than the last 2 years. It's like, that's not a good culture for me. That's a culture of blaming other people and not looking at yourself.
Yeah, I have to say that this is the first time, the last sort of month or so, since it's obviously become clear that Liverpool were going to win the league, then they've won the league, and Arsenal have gone out of the Champions League. This is the first time I've started to think that Arteta's not quite got his messaging right in terms of striking that balance between wanting to protect the group that he got, but admitting the obvious shortcomings that we can all see. And I think he's struggling with that at the moment. I think he's got this mentality of, I just defend my players, siege mentality, we us against the world type thing. When actually, objectively, and it's not a criticism of him or the group, that they can't rectify, they just need a bit more. They're going to sign Martin Zubimendi from Real Sociedad. That will happen. So that kind of strengthens that midfield, that they're going to lose Jorginho. We don't know what's going to happen with Thomas Partey. There's potential new contract there, but even if there isn't, Zubimendi at least strengthens the numbers in that position. They're going to go and try and get a number 9, and I think they need another wide player as well. I think they still, we're talking about structure and control of matches. Well, if you need someone to go and do something a bit different, then they need more than Saka to go and deliver that, because Martinelli's not kicked on, Trossard's not consistent enough. Ethan Nwaneri could be anything, but he's only 18.
Just on Saka, I mean, Saka is their best player. He's the jewel in the crown, isn't he? He's such a good player in the sense that he turns up on the biggest occasions against the biggest teams. Now, how long will he put up with trajectory and progression? He wants to win something, doesn't he?
I wouldn't be worried. I mean, Saka and Celibra have both got 2 years left on their deals. I wouldn't be worried about Saka at all. Celibra would be the one that might concern me, because I think the Real Madrid sort of machine, we all know how it works over there. It's starting to kind of whir into motion, isn't it? And I actually put it to Mikel the other week like that. I said, look, we're getting these noises from Madrid. The sort of Spanish press is starting to whip up this idea that he might want to move and the club might look for him. And we all know how it works. But this is your opportunity to just say he's not going anywhere. And he didn't say that. He said,
probably knows he can't.
From what I've spoken. From what I know from speaking to William directly, he's happy here, but it's one for Andrea, it's one for the club. That's the one that would concern me.
So how do they deal with that then? If you're Andrea Berta now, do you think, right, we'll try next year, but if you get to the final year of his contract, then you've got a problem. I mean, now it's almost like this summer is, I won't say it's make or break, obviously, but it's a big summer, because you need to decide now, either keep him, sign him down. If you don't sign a contract, then they've got a problem.
Yeah, I mean, well, they won't sell him. I mean, I don't think they would sell him under any circumstances this summer. Unless, of course, he decides to push really hard for a move and go on strike or hand in a transfer request, all that sort of stuff. But I don't see that happening as we sit here now. I think it would be one that they will look to tie down as early as possible because of the message it sends to the new signings and the rest of the squad. I mean, they'll hope that Saka will send that message, I think, because they feel pretty confident about that one. But, neither of these players are going to come cheap. They are two of the best players in Europe at a very good age. They deserve and demand top dollar.
Saka can be the guy that leads this team to where it needs to be by showing that commitment.
Well, he's the one. In the piece that we're sort of talking about that we put out last week, that they need somebody to go to Salah levels. The last 3 seasons, the top goal scorer in the Premier League has played for the champions. Erling Haaland twice, and Mohamed Salah, we assume, is going to win it this year. Now, that isn't a sort of gotcha by itself, but it does suggest that the team that wins the title needs a player who just goes above and beyond. And the last player to score 25 league goals in a season for Arsenal was Thierry Henry in 2004-05. So it's been 20 years since an Arsenal player scored that many goals. And Saka's the one you look at in the squad at the moment and you think, all right, slightly augmented by the fact that he takes penalties, but he's the one who could get them there. He could get to 25 goals if he's fit and he's a bit more ruthless and selfish in the final third because he's such a nice guy. Maybe he needs to have a bit more of a meaner streak in him, but he's the only one I could see who could get there unless you go after an Isak or a Gyökeres or...
Actually, that's one of the reasons why they haven't pushed to sign a striker as much as they should have. That 22-23 campaign where they had... I'm just looking at the stats. Martinelli got 15 in the league. Odegaard got 15 in the league. Saka got 14 in the league. That Arteta had this idea that you share all the goals around and we'll get these kind of numbers from these players again and again and again. And just completely misjudged that the likes of Martinelli and Odegaard in particular just aren't going to be able to consistently hit 15 and 20 Premier League goals.
Nobody's got 10 for Arsenal in the league this season.
Well, Man United made that mistake with it. Rashford, Martial and Greenwood scored over 50 league goals between one season. That was they're the future and look where they are now. And, I think Martinelli is probably... similar to Anthony Martial in that respect, that he's not quite at the level that you want him to be to kick on, but Saka is. I know I take your point on Saka, and I think you're right in the sense that homegrown player, London boy, he's Arsenal through and through, but you'd be looking at people like Lamine Yamal and Desiree Doué and Dembele at PSG thinking, these guys could be winning the Champions League, and he is a player that could play for Barcelona and Real Madrid. He really is, and that's why I'd be a bit cautious if I was Arsenal that you've just got to give him whatever he wants, give him a 5-year contract, make him the Salah money, because he is that good, and you have to have. He's the poster boy, isn't he, of the club? That if he shows the commitment, if you back him, it shows Arsenal mean business, because he's such a good player that every club in Europe would want to take him away.
Yeah, yes. But as I say, I really don't think Saka's the problem. I think that they will be able to commit him to a new deal. The only thing, I mean, there is a little bit of background on this, that Saka's agent was also the agent that did the Chido Obi Martin deal to Manchester United.
He won't go Man United.
I know, no, but there was a bit of. I'm not suggesting. Before we clip that up, I'm not suggesting that for a minute. But I think there was a bit of friction between the agency and the club from the fallout of that deal, the Chido deal. Now, who knows? I suppose the key factor is that Edu's no longer there, so the fact that Andrea Berta comes in probably means it's a clean slate, but whether there's any lingering sort of issue between that agency and the club when they come to sit down to talk about Saka, we'll have to wait and see.
If they want to use it as a wedge, I'm sure they'll use it, but I think Saka will drive that one, don't you?
Yeah.
One final one then before we move on. You look into your crystal ball, what kind of season do Arsenal have next year? And do they win the Premier League? Easy one to finish.
Well, I don't think that Liverpool are guaranteed to kick on in the same way that once City kind of got there, you thought, okay, they're just serious contenders now for the next sort of 5 years, and probably the team to beat for that long. That is not to say that Liverpool can't win the league again next year. Of course they can. But I don't think their rivals will be looking at them thinking, okay, the bar's been raised here to a new level and we've got to go again. I think that, Arsenal, City, Chelsea to some extent, if they can get their act together, will look at them and think, they're there to be shot at next year. Will Salah have the same kind of year he's had this year? Will Van Dijk be available for every single minute? as he has been in the league this season. I think if Arsenal are proactive in the market, they start with a favourite's chance of winning the title next year. But they have to sign Zubimendi, a striker, and probably a wide player as well for that to be true.
Well, it's time for a break. When we come back, we'll be looking at our favourite memories of Goodison Park with Don Hutchison.